Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Marsha Gordon. I'm the president and CEO of the Business Council of Westchester. It is our pleasure and distinct honor to bring back for 2024 our ongoing commitment to talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the business community and the community at large. We really began this several years ago with an incredible partnership with Balancing Life's Issues, who guided us and continue to guide us in how to address this issue. And we have found wonderful, wonderful representatives who can also help us address DEIB issues in the workplace. So it is our great pleasure. This morning's webinar is a little different because we are going to have a keynote presenter, James Francis from Balancing Life's Issues, and then we're going to have the rest of the panel react along with you, the audience, as to some of James's and everyone else's suggestions. But I do want to provide some formal introductions. First of all, our presenting sponsor is Balancing Life's Issues. Under the leadership of the wonderful, incredible Wendy Wollner, Balancing Life's Issues provides seminars, executive training, and consulting services to help people experience their lives differently. Their programming teaches over 1 million people per year, each of whom discover new skills, become creative problem solvers, and cultivate a mindset that helps them live healthier lives and grow their careers. And I just want to note that Balancing Life's Issues is always on the cutting edge. And just so the other day that they are also helping people in the workplace deal with family issues as well. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of exciting opportunities to elevate your workforce and bring that balance into people's lives and then back into the workplace through our wonderful presenting sponsor, Balancing Life's Issues. We want to also thank our contributing sponsors, Con Edison, Empire City Casino by MGM Resorts, Heineken, Webster Bank, and Wells Fargo. So let's all admit that having difficult conversations can be challenging, but extremely important. Discussions about race and gender can be difficult for several reasons, rooted in historical, social, and psychological factors. In this session, we will provide participants with the resources and questions necessary to start the conversation. This presentation will be followed, as I said, by a panel discussion, sharing thoughts, reactions, and real-life applications. Our featured speaker is James Francis, DEIB Director, Balancing Life's Issues. And our featured panel is Melissa Andrew, Esquire, Chief Diversity Officer, Chief Client Relations Officer at Dorff, Nelson and Zatterer, LLP. Danette Jordan, Executive Director of Human Resources at Empire City Casino by MGM Resorts. Howard Kelly, Banking Center Manager at Webster Bank, and Alicia Nicole Roberts, Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Con Edison. James, I'm going to turn this over to you to lead the way.
Thank you so much, Marsha, and everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on something that is truly, truly near and dear to my heart. As Marsha mentioned, I'm an employee of Balancing Life's Issues, BLI for short, and I've been a member there for, oh my goodness, almost 12 years now. And with my boss, some you may know her, Wendy Wollner, the origin of today's presentation really stems from our relationship from the past 12 years and the numerous conversations that she and I had within the realm of DEI and B. They forged the relationship to where we stand today, right? A brief example of this was pre-COVID, a number of years ago. She had a beautiful new car and she asked me to move her vehicle. I simply declined. At the time, she just took it as, possibly me being standoffish. But then I followed up with a conversation, explaining to her the why. I said, well, Wendy, you have a beautiful new car. It's not mine. I don't feel comfortable driving a vehicle like this in Westchester County. And then I went into my background, my culture, my personal experiences. And 12 years later, we still discuss that. And it forged a bond, a relationship through these initial difficult conversations that can last a lifetime. That can last a lifetime. So with that, let us certainly get started on how to navigate difficult conversations, right? In our agenda, you may feel uncomfortable. We certainly may feel uncomfortable. And ask yourself why. Is it your personal experience? For me, is it my past? And I don't mean experiences. I mean culture, American history. Those are the things that we're bringing to light and certainly going to discuss. Having an internal shift, some tools to not only begin the conversation, but to maintain this discussion. Today will not be a one-time light switch event. This will be a conversation that we should all maintain within our workspaces and within our lives. And critical thinking through dialogue, continuous dialogue, right? Continuous dialogue. And I want you to all ask yourselves, when we look at this list, how many things have we actually had difficulty leading discussions, whether it's diversity and inclusion overall in the industry, stereotypes, unconscious or implicit bias, privilege, microaggressions, the wage gap, representation with gender, age, disability, LGBTQ plus diversity. I'm going to be honest, I have certainly had difficulty leading these conversations, but I want us all to remember, you only know what you know. And the same thing goes for myself. But that's the launch point. Not expecting everyone to know everything about everyone. That's simply unfair and unrealistic. So that mentality really needs to change and start with ourselves, because there are going to be many, many barriers that come within these conversations, right? And the first one is historical context. When we speak about DEI and B, there's a letter that has been incorporated, which is J. And the J is a representative of justice. So historical content comes into play. And as you could all imagine, this can be a touchy topic, but that is okay. That is okay. Myself, my mother was from the rural South, and I remember the stories in which she shared and my grandmother shared when I was a young child. Stories of discrimination, of not being able to walk down a certain street at any time during the day. And I always remember, speaking of historical context, the civil rights movement. Civility, not equality, not the equal rights movement, the civil rights movement that is extremely celebrated. I remember my grandmother telling me, well, James, all I wanted was people to allow me to get home safely. That's my historical context, right? And continuing to share these back and forth banters, that's really the goal. That is the goal. So it's okay to be uncomfortable, because many times these challenging conversations, they will be just that. The fear of offending people, saying something offensive, inadvertently contributing stereotypes, but have the willingness to be understanding and apologetic. So it's not about the intent of my comment. It's about the impact of my comment that really makes a difference. So if I'm not meaning to intend someone of a person or a group, that's fine. But once they tell me that I have, then the conversation should certainly shift at that point, all right? Unconscious bias, things that we certainly have. our belief system, our, excuse me, race, gender, our attitudes, things we've seen, things we believe unconsciously. The power dynamic being very difficult and afraid, literally, to maybe speak up the ladder. The fear of the important first step of starting, it's a tough hurdle to overcome, because I've certainly been there. So on the other side, if you're a leader, if you're a manager, be understanding of that. Be empathetic during these conversations. Cultural competency gap. Being aware of the impact it can have, it is important. I may have been raised extremely different than you of your other colleague, your colleague of their other friend. And you know what? These differences are perfectly fine and should be embraced. They should be embraced, not just as us being vastly different human beings, just different experiences coming together as one, right? The fear of judgment and being defensive. Timing is everything. Timing is everything. And be conscious of that, and possibly lead with that. I know this is fresh. This is certainly fresh in the news, but I'm just curious how you feel about this certain issue. Lead with open, honest, empathetic conversation and dialogue. And what it does is fosters the relationship. So when we're having the more difficult conversation, something is already created. The bond has already been formed. The lack of inclusive language. Self-awareness. Self-awareness. Things that were okay really 5 to 10 years ago may not be fine now. May not be fine now. An example of this is, for those who are familiar with real estate, and the main bedroom in the home, what was it previously called? The master bedroom. Inclusive language. Now that has changed. Now it's the main bedroom, right? Versus the master bedroom. Emotional intensity. And that comes with the timing of it. Maybe in real time is not the best to have these conversations. Maybe give it a few minutes, days, and weeks before we have this discussion. And an important barrier is a fear of retaliation. Negative consequences if I say something. And that's where us as organizational leaders, we must form this safe space of psychological safety where everyone can express themselves openly, honestly, authentically, being themselves. That's what this discussion is about, right? And with these few barriers that we see, please remember this. This is always the wonderful launch point. Shifting from, you know what, James? I understand. I understand what you mean. My friend, he or she, they've gone through that situation as well. And shift that to help me understand. Help me understand your situation, what you've gone through, your experience. Because let me tell you, it comes across very, very differently. It comes across very differently versus I know, I get it. Help me understand. And that is important. And this shift comes from yourself. I could always suggest a change that you can have in your life, in your career, but you must click that switch personally and internally to actually make the change, right? So everything follows from this. And to me, it's much more than asking a question. It's the how. How are you leading these conversations? And lead from the I perspective. You know what, James? I may not really understand what you mean by that. I've never been in that situation before. Versus, you need to tell me more about that. The I, leading with the I, right? And being uncomfortable. That uncomfortable space is where learning is fostered. I truly believe that, because that's when you're learning something new and different. And that sense of being uncomfortable is perfectly fine. It's okay. It's that normal feeling that you have during difficult conversations. Because once again, there's things that I've learned about people and human beings. I was very uncomfortable asking these questions because I never knew how they would respond. But taking that first step of empathy, leading with honest and open dialogue, it can change everything. It can change everything. So it's more than simply asking a question. It's leading with that mindset and having that shift in mentality that I don't know it all. I do not know everything, but I would love to learn. Speaking of learning, implicit bias and microaggressions. Microaggression. These are some conversation you can certainly have. If you've had an unconscious bias training in the past, what did you learn from it? What were some of your takeaways? Or this is a big one to me. Are there any forms of microaggressions that you wish people were more aware of? For those who may not be as familiar with what microaggressions are, there are things like asking someone from a specific ethnicity, where are you really from? Telling telling someone to man up. Asking someone, can I touch your hair? After one sentence, telling me, oh my goodness, James, you speak so well. Those are microaggressions. Those are microaggressions. And we see them in various forms. And it's very important to understand what they are, right? So when we have this conversation, someone may have no idea what they are. But once again, it's not based on the intent. It's based on the impact. Okay? So if you've seen or heard these things, that's exactly what they are. Another question you can ask is, hey, do you think our diversity policies really contribute to that safe, inclusive work environment? Because again, this conversation is for everyone. For everyone. This is an everyone discussion because each and every one of us are checking off a box. Just ask yourself what box or how many boxes aren't you currently checking off? So when we're speaking towards these things, begin to think critically, keenly, listening deeply. Become an active listener. Ask questions throughout the conversation. And once the discussion is over, act with intent. A continual learning process. That's what life should be. Continuous learning. If you tell me something about voting rights or women's rights, it should not be your job to just continue this conversation. You've opened the door to the dialogue. Now I'm going to do my own research to expand on our discussion. And that's a wonderful thing. And that is a wonderful thing. And reflect frequently on these conversations. I led the discussion with an example for myself and Wendy Wollner. That was years ago. But we still have this discussion about that. Because she had no idea why I would just simply kind of reject her, simply moving her car down the street. So learn to see and think critically, and the continued discussion and reflecting on things on a frequent manner, all right? This is like any other relationship. Establish trust. It is not just given to us. It's built. It must be built, and it's crucial for these honest conversations. And it may not happen the first time out. If I, attempt to speak with someone and they're uncomfortable about something, I'll respect that. And hopefully down the line, they'll be willing and open to share these conversations with me. Acknowledging discomfort and active listening, I spoke to both of these. These things will not be easy, but as is life, because the big picture of the overall comfort, understanding of everyone being themselves, that's where we want to be. That's where we want to be. One thing that I always do is I always share personal experiences because I want you to see my perspective. This is the lens from James Francis. Mind you, I'm not saying anyone. All of us have different perspectives and lenses. My personal experiences are my lens. And what I would like you to do during these conversations is share your lens as well. Do not allow this to be a one-sided conversation. Express yourself because people are always willing to do that. That's how trust is established. Whenever possible, provide educational resources. A good one that's recent, not so recent, is called 38 at the Garden. It's a story. I'm a sports guy. It's a story of a New York Knick. Oh my goodness. 12 years ago now. And him joining the team established a wonderful ripple within the Asian community worldwide. It was a global phenomenon. One of my favorites is also Amend. Amend, I think it's on Netflix, narrated by Will Smith and other actors, and it shows the historical context of this country. And lastly, when we leave here, live and lead with empathy. With empathy. Take other people's lives and experiences into consideration. Foster it as a true foundation for understanding. We're speaking about establishing trust and listening and discomfort. It all starts with empathy. I may not fully be able to relate to what you're telling me. I may not fully understand, but I can show you respect and lead and encourage with empathy. Right? I can certainly do that. And with that, Marsha, it is all yours. Thank you so much as we continue this conversation on DEI and B Critical Conversations.
Wow, I have to say you've touched my heart, James, today. You really have. And my intellect and my emotions and my heart. And I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation. I also really want to recognize our wonderful contributing sponsors, Con Edison, Empire City Casino by MGM Resorts, Heineken, Webster Bank, and Wells Fargo, of course, Balancing Life's Issues, our presenting sponsors. And now I'm going to turn it over to the panel, but I do want to, and please don't feel like you need to start with answering these questions, but I do want to let you know some questions that appeared in the question room. So one of them was, how do we build the structures within an organization to set us up for success, to have difficult conversations? In other words, how do we begin to build the foundation of trust? And then this is I think is a very specific and interesting one. If after asking, can I touch your hair, meaning braids, which upset somebody and we haven't spoken since, how can that rift be fixed? So Melissa, should we kick it off with you? Just to read your thoughts on the general conversation and how in your workplace you navigate these difficult conversations and recommend to your clients that they do as well.
Thank you, Marsha. Thank you, James, for a wonderful presentation. I actually want to talk about the microaggressions, which is something that some people think that when they make a comment, they're actually complimenting the other individual, when in reality, the individual is taking it as offensive. And some people kind of need to think through their comments and what they're about to say before they actually say it. And something I hear quite often is, well, you don't look like a lawyer. I'm like, okay, well, what does a lawyer look like? In their mind, they're probably thinking of, let's say, Perry Mason, or somebody that looks like Perry Mason and not somebody who looks like me. So kind of think about where that comment is coming from. That's coming from our implicit biases. We have in our mind what we think a lawyer should look like. And then when you meet me, you're kind of taken aback and you make this comment, which you think is actually complimentary, but it's really not. So I kind of wanted to just throw that out there. In the office at Dorff, Nelson and Zauder, I've found that, yes, there are some people who are hesitant to have these conversations. But as James said, you do need to have established the trust and open it up in a way that is not going to be pointing fingers or accusatory. And I do like, whenever I do speak on these topics, I say us. I always share stories about myself. I don't say you. I'm always learning. I've made mistakes too. And, it takes the other person to maybe pointing it out to us sometimes so that we don't repeat the behavior. I'm all about education. And there are some folks who think that, oh, it's not my job to educate the other people, the other person that I'm speaking with. But that's counterproductive because if we don't have the education, we're never going to learn. And that's the mentality and the vibes we have at Dorff, Nelson and Zauderer.
Thank you. Nicole, you represent a very large company.
Yes.
Just wondering how you handled this conversation and how you advise others at Con Edison.
Well, thank you for inviting me to the panel again this year. I agree, James, your talk touched on a lot of great points. And one of those points is navigating the conversation requires us to, develop more self-awareness, develop more cultural awareness about people that are different from us, having that be the starting point. And as DEI professionals or practitioners, we need to lead by example in that space. So I think, whenever we're having difficult conversations or initiating them, we have to kind of pave the way in that regard. And that's essentially how I do it here. I try to get to know people as best as possible. I try to create that safe space where people do feel like they can let their guard down a little bit and share and not be as concerned about making a mistake, and giving them the space to be open and accepting to maybe some course correction. And that just made me think of the question that someone left in the chat about, repairing something that was broken after, something happened and the person took offense to touching a conversation after that, but the person has to be willing to reach out.
Mhm.
Wonderful. That's really interesting. Howard, talk about Webster Bank and what your advice and how you handle difficult conversations. And I'm going to come back to all of you to drill down a little bit deeper the next round. And James, I'll include you too in this if you want, with specific examples of how you might have handled a difficult conversation in the workplace. So Howard, why don't we just start with general reactions?
Yeah, no, I think James hit it right on the head. And, the one thing that really I got from the conversation is thinking about how I was reacting to comments from individuals when they didn't realize from an unbiased perception that they had impacted me. So initially, I've always struggled with trying to communicate with how it impacts someone, years and years later, through training, through learning things through the DEIB Council, having that empathy, seeking understanding, and really focusing on the conversation as an open line of communication is probably the primary thing that we really focus on, because it really is a lack of understanding. It could be from a geographical standpoint where you may have not encountered different individuals simply from where you reside or through your travels to make it to your company. And really, we've done a really good job here at Webster Bank with focusing on culture activation trainings and seminars, just to have thought-provoking conversations about you as a leader, but also your impact to people that may report to you or to people that you may have to interact that are above you, just to give you the proper course of how to have those conversations. So it's really focusing on the trust aspect and just to really educate yourself. And I think that goes a long way for building a healthy relationship with your colleagues and peers.
Thank you. Jeanette at Empire City Casino by MGM Resorts. I know because I've been part of conversations on a corporate basis, how committed your company is to DEIB.
I'm extremely proud of that because I think that the conversation is open and is honest. And I think it starts with just a level of authenticity and vulnerability. So I'm happy to work in an environment that absolutely fosters that. But I want to take a step back. And I want to talk about a time in an environment that I didn't experience that. And something that you indicated, James, that kind of sparked a memory. I had, he was my boss, it was early on in my career, and he would come in on the weekends after a long weekend. We would talk about our weekends, and he would hold his hand up next to mine and he would say, "Oh, look, I'm almost as dark as you. I got a good tan this weekend." And I used to pause in that moment because I didn't know how to respond. And fast forward,
Lots of reactions here.
I'm sure I'm getting it. And I used to think, how do I say it? What do I say? Am I the only one? Am I the only one having this conversation? Fast forward, the chatter went around within a certain amount of people that would talk about the comments that he made to them. And so, again, he's my boss. So what do? I might note, I'm in human resources. So let's take it a step further. With that being said, one day he says to me, "You know, you're a different kind of Black person." And I paused again and for a long time. And then he went on to say, "You don't speak like other people. You don't talk like the rest of them." And I had a moment where I could have either just cocooned and said nothing, or I could have addressed the comment head on. And I chose to address the comment head on and have a courageous conversation with him about, first I asked him what he meant by it. And I allowed him to explain further what his thought process was. And as he did, I realized it wasn't coming from a place of negativity. It was coming from a place of his prior exposure and an environment that he had worked in. And he sincerely thought he was giving me a compliment. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that conversation, we continued on and we talked, and I explained to him how it wasn't a compliment. It could be perceived not as a compliment. I talked to him about the whys. And I will tell you, that was one of the most pivotal parts of my professional career, of his career, because he realized, he actually said to me, "I've been offending so many people, and I didn't realize that." So I say all of that to say, in your organization, I think it's important to have some own vulnerability. Listen, ask some key questions to get a better understanding of where that individual is coming from, but then use it as an opportunity to teach. Because you don't know how I walk, where I come from, unless I tell you. You don't know how I feel unless I share that. And I think sometimes we have to take that moment to be a little bit more vulnerable and talk through the scenarios. With respect to the question in the chat with regard to hair, we know hair is a topic. And I think sometimes it's okay to talk about it. I think it's good to go back to that colleague to try to mend that, relationship and conversation, because again, sometimes things are not coming from a place of harm. It's a question, and I think it's something that we shy away from the questions. And I think this is a time where it's important that we embrace it. We're more alike than we are different.
Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for giving a very specific example. And I'm going to throw out the questions here. in the chat boxes. So feel free to address that, and also to give some real life examples also. So someone said, people have said awful things to me when they find out I'm gay. You don't look or seem gay, for example. Says much more about them than about me. I've been working on not internalizing what other people think or say. Another one, as a well-intentioned white woman, I know I've said some stupid things. I really appreciate the suggestions on how to have meaningful conversations that build rather than undermine trust. I'm always learning. Right here, what can you do if you were called derogatory sexist names? You inform management and HR, they refuse to help you. Now the retaliation has started on all levels. And the second question, what is the role that an HR director has with regards to authority? It appears that management is working HR to cover themselves. To be honest, I don't feel good about filing the complaint in the first place. And James, I've not received any empathy at all. Thank you for sharing your words and advice. I'm not asking everyone to answer every question, but perhaps some of your answers some of your experiences may reflect answers to these to these questions. Who wants to take it on? Anybody? Any examples? Any questions? Any responses?
I'll take the one from dealing with a sexist comment and having the fear of dealing with HR. So at Webster Bank, our DEIB council is comprised of 8 different business resource group. And every once in a while, for DEIB council calls or just somebody reaches out to a representative that belongs to one of the BRG, and a question comes up. I love the fact that it does. I also understand why it doesn't go to HR, because many colleagues believe that if I go to HR, management and HR work together in collaboration versus protecting my privacy as well as addressing a big offense based on that particular person. I'm appreciative that we have such different divisions of DEIB, because from that, we have even bigger conversations. It helps develop training. We oftentimes may have to reach out to the individual to get more understanding. And then it's a conversation of, how do you want to handle this? We will support you if you do feel like you're going to be retaliated against. And it's kind of helped in the long run. I'm fortunate to say this is in our organization, and it is uncomfortable. It's one of the many uncomfortable conversations. Our HR group is fantastic, but also they understand when people don't reach out. So having a council like this is also supportive in the same front, because people don't know where to go through. And it's like, wait a minute, I do have a colleague that may talk about this on a regular basis. Let me pick their brain and go from there. But to that person advice, if you don't have that, I always say HR is there to protect you first and foremost. You really should reach out to them, but you really should also share why you have some reservations to reaching out to you, because I think that then starts the conversation of, well, how can we go about this? And then HR will ultimately do their due diligence in trying to rectify that situation. So, for that individual, my heart goes out to them, because that's unfortunate. And I hope you're getting the proper support.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that quickly? I
Please,
thought that,
Nicole.
I thought that what Howard said was very thorough and clear. And I agree with many of the points, if not all of the points that he's made. I will add that it is an opportunity, I think, for companies to look at different channels to afford employees places to go that may not necessarily be singular like HR.
Mhm.
And to your point, the councils. So at Con Edison, we don't only have the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we have an ethics department, we have a corporate security department, we also have different advocates within the councils that can help employees to kind of navigate spaces like that in a confidential way. I do think that it's always challenging because larger organizations like HR tend to have different goals. So it's not that they don't want to advocate for an employee, but they are directed to follow particular policies and procedures. And if an employee is talking about a sensitive issue that they want it to be handled in a delicate way, HR may not be equipped to do that. Also, sometimes, employees, we're all in a different place on our journey on how we understand the nuances of what people deal with. And I could be a HR, representative or business partner for many years and still not understand certain things about people's lived experiences in the workplace. So I think it's an opportunity for some companies, even if it's a small company, to provide alternate channels for employees to go through so that they don't feel that they may be retaliated against. Because sometimes people will take things personally when a concern is brought to them and the person doesn't necessarily know how to respond.
Thank you. Thank you. There is a question in the chat box. Melissa, I'm going to come to you, but I'm going to just throw out two comments. There's a question in the chat box about a very specific question about real estate and banking. And Howard, maybe I'm going to ask you to take that offline if you can at some point. I think it might be helpful, and we can tie in our real estate colleagues as well. Someone else asked if these conversations are difficult, but today we're also dealing with empowered pushback nationwide. Do you find anything different in the response to some of these conversations, difficult conversations? What approach do you take in dealing with those conversations while also battling the DEI pushback we're seeing across the country? Are you doing anything different? So Melissa, I'm not asking you to do that directly. I'd like to give you a chance to respond with some examples or something else. And also, Melissa, you are you started, the law firm started as a very small organization. You're now a very wonderful mid-sized organization, but hoping also maybe for some perspective from others in dealing in smaller organizations than large corporations.
So I think it might be bigger than mid-sized at this point, but
absolutely. Absolutely. Now you're pretty big. How big is Dorff Nelson and Zeller?
We have 4 offices now.
4 offices,
yes.
And hundreds of employees.
And
absolutely. That is a bigger than mid-sized organization.
But for small organizations, honestly, it starts with the buy-in of the leadership. If you don't have that conversation with the leaders and they agree that there are issues that need to be fixed or that you need certain policies in place, DEIB is not going to work. And that kind of goes for any type of any size organization. But here we started out small. I went to the leadership and we started our Diversity and Inclusion Council. And I was privileged, and I'm still privileged, to lead that. So we didn't tackle all issues all at once. We did it step by step, because if you try to do everything all at once, you're going to fail. It's not going to work. So my advice for small organizations is really to start a council, and have different members of the organization in that council from different groups representing. We have attorneys, we have non-attorneys. We chose to leave leadership out of the council. You can have leadership in your council if you want, but just start that discussion, start that conversation, and get a gauge on what's going on at the firm, because we don't know what everybody is thinking, how everybody's feeling. So that's my advice. But before we leave, I do want to answer one of the questions. So the question is, addressing microaggressions that are not impacted directed to someone, but they want to be an active bystander? This is a great question. I think that how you should go about it without causing additional harm, and obviously look towards the person who was impacted by the microaggression and try and see how they feel about this. But maybe pose to the person who made the comment, help me to understand what you meant. I'm confused by what you meant. Explain to me what you meant. And then you can take that opportunity to say why you were confused and why you think it was an offensive comment, and maybe have the other person's back. And then that way it's out in the open. And if that person who was impacted, who the microaggression was directed to, maybe that will give them a voice to stand up and say, yes, this is why I was offended, or why it's a microaggression.
Thank you. Another, I think, excellent question that was posed here. In our efforts to foster an inclusive environment that embraces diversity and equity, how can we effectively engage with and include communities that might have more inclusionary practices, such as the ultra-Orthodox and Hasidic Jewish communities in our area? Given their unique cultural and religious practices that might seem as at odds with some DEI principles, what strategies can we adopt to ensure that they are representative and heard within our DEI initiatives while respecting their values and beliefs?
That's a good question.
Very good question.
Well, at Con Edison, we take advantage of employee resource groups and business resource groups, and we have one for Jewish Americans and Jewish employees. I saw that Danette was going to respond, so I'll let her go.
Yeah, I was thinking I would translate it to any group. I know we're speaking specifically of one, but I think it's something that we could apply across the board. Just again, fostering the dialogue and the conversation, asking people about their culture, about their celebrations, how we can then bring that into the workplace to make sure that other people are exposed to it. That, to me, it starts a lot with just the conversation. It starts with you as the individual being authentic. I am not going to share on this call some of my authentic experiences, but if you talk to my colleagues, I try to keep it as real as possible, to share my experiences, to talk about who I am. I would encourage that as part of the dialogue, and then asking questions, and trying obviously not to be offensive in any way, but talking about things, because we are all different and there's so many things that we can learn from each other. I also recognize, and I will say this candidly, sometimes you have to meet people where they are. Some people are just not open. Some people are just not going to change their direction and their thought. And that is what, move on, then it's okay. Sometimes you just can't convince. There's a whole other world out there that you can tap into. Maybe sometimes it's okay that you just leave it where it is. I appreciate this dialogue. I think this is important, not just this month, but just as an ongoing space, because this is an ongoing scenario. That I think, and things that come up in the news continue to, bring up feelings and reactions. And so I think it's worth the ongoing conversation to make sure that we all stay connected and we all understand each other's point of view.
James, oh, go ahead, Howard, yes.
I'd like to just say another comment, because all the information is fantastic. You also got to consider what the need is. All these different employee groups, business resource groups happen because the organization identified a clear need to meet that audience. So the councils and groups don't happen because, hey, we have X, Y, and Z. Those different groups said, hey, we want to have representation. We have different struggles. We have a story. And that's where you start, and I'll go with our newest one, multi-generational, which is basically all walks of life in various ages, trying to get to know one another through differences based off of when they were born. and finding commonality with one another, at the same time understanding we need each other, because one group may have seen different versions of financial impact while the other ones may be prompt to with new and up and coming things. So that was one group that I can guarantee we didn't think we necessarily need until we started having the conversation. It's like, you know what? This is an interesting group. Why don't we start? And their programming for our organization is fantastic, and you'd be surprised of what you can do if you just always think about your audience and trying to meet the needs of the people that work for you or the communities that you serve.
And
James,
oh, I'm sorry, Marsha.
please.
No, just to piggyback off what Howard mentioned, I have a great idea for you. You're probably already doing it with the generational gap, reverse mentoring.
Mm.
Yep.
Not just
Yes.
not just a generation mentoring one. No. We're gonna
Yep.
switch. We're gonna flip the switch. Reverse mentoring is a wonderful, wonderful idea. So that was on point. You were speaking, I was like, that's great. Because that's something I did early in my career. And it really changed even my scope of working with people from different generations. And
Right.
secondly, I want to remind everyone on this call that the DEI&B is not a one size fits all. This is not a one size fits all. Every organization comes with different screws and curveballs and experiences. That's very important to remember. We've spoken about 4 different examples here, right? Vastly different. Vastly different. That's also important to remember. What your organization's needs may not be Melissa's organizational needs or Howard's organizational needs. So do not just put the DEIB in one box, in your box. We really have to understand and really pull out from leadership and even non-leaders where our needs are really should be focused on. What should we focus on within our group and organization?
Thank you. Someone asked about diversity councils that are in their introductory phases. What are base level areas you consider to be important for consideration when developing the overall DEI strategy? Anybody want to take that? And if not, it's okay. We can have that. We use these questions as a base for the next webinar, so that's fine. That's fine also.
So I'll just chime in. When we started our D&I council, after we got through the basics, got to know each other and everything, we said, what's the first thing that's important to the law firm? And, one of the first things was looking at the policies and procedures, because that's the basis for everything that we do. So we wanted to look through them and see if they were all neutrally worded, that they apply to everyone across the board, did not discriminate against certain groups. So that's one of the first things that we thought was really important at the basic level. And then everything kind of flowed from there.
Thank you. Anyone else?
At some point. I mean,
I
I
think-
said what Melissa said. You need some foundational pillars to work from in the beginning, and I think it helps you to springboard what initiatives you're going to focus on.
And something else, if I could just add, it might seem so obvious to all of us right now, but in other communities, in other areas, and several years ago, the idea of looking at the calendar to make sure you weren't having an event, a big meeting, a staff meeting on a religious holiday, and I go across the board here,
Mhm.
was, as somebody who lived in a community that was mostly different from me personally, that was a very big deal. That was a very big deal. And so little things like that can be, respectful, or having food that everybody can feel comfortable eating in some way. And sometimes it's a special order, and that's okay. Those are, I think, ways, if I may, to contribute also to a sense of belonging and not being left out.
Yeah.
Any comments on that? And it seems
I mean,
obvious to us
I
right
agree.
now, living in Westchester County, New York, in 2024, but it wasn't so obvious all the time.
Yeah, sometimes the small things are what's very impactful in the long run. I see somebody in the chat would say tie your intentions to your strategic plan, and that's correct. You should
Yes.
definitely do that.
Absolutely. I think that's the way to be most impactful if you're going to start anything in an organization, understanding what's the baseline, what are you hoping to accomplish? What is it that that your team members are seeking as an outcome? That's how you'll be able to measure your success. It doesn't make sense to create a program and push it down. It's not going to have ultimate impact across the board, because then it's going to look like a checkbox, and you
Right.
don't want that.
Right. So our organization, for our strategy for all the BRGs, tie in with the 3 C's. That's going to be colleagues, clients, and community. So we want to impact holistically across the board, because if we don't meet those 3 measures, we're going to fall short in some category. So it's really important that you have that foundation. Policy review is vital to get the ground running. And then, it has to, and I know many of us have shared this, it has to start from the top. 100%. We have, our CEO is a co-chair for the entire council. We have executive chairs that are sponsors that are connected to each BRG. We have executive allies, and each BRG is ran by multiple co-chairs to make sure that the programming for our DEIB council is effective, but it's also based on what we're getting from colleagues as well as our community, as in for our clients, of what they're looking to see our organization do and grow into. So it's not an overnight success. I think we talk about it now because we grew in scale. So we call it Webster 2.0. because we cover from New York all the way to Boston. But I can tell you, we move no longer in silos, but as one group. So at any event, whether it be for internal colleagues or clients, you see a complete presence of all BRG people that are involved. They're at every event. And I think that was the initial design when they decided to create this council, that it doesn't matter who is sponsoring the events or the activity. We do it all together. And I will tell you, in the last few years, it's really been impactful.
Well, you have all been incredibly impactful. And James, I'm going to ask if you would, to kind of round this out for us and leave us maybe with some final thoughts. But I think this has been one of the most impactful webinars that we've had on this topic. We're so proud of the work that all of you are doing, and the great interaction from the members of the audience who are asking such important questions. James, any final words on how to navigate this difficult conversation and what we've learned today?
Absolutely. And Marsha, thanks again for having me in BCW. And I know something that I lead with Balancing Life's Issues is, and all of us have mentioned it, this is just not today. This is just not in February. This is a continuous conversation in a world of continuous change, right? Let's embrace the change every day moving forward, right? Because the challenging conversations we're having in 2024, they will be different in 2025. And that's okay. Look forward to the difficulty. Look forward to being uncomfortable, right? To foster that wonderful learning and inclusive environment and relationship. That's something that we don't all need, something that we all deserve. Something that we all deserve. So with that, thank you once again.
Thank you all. Thank you again to Balancing Life's Issues, to Con Edison, Empire City Casino by MGM Resorts, Heineken, Webster Bank, and Wells Fargo. Thank you, James Francis, Melissa Andrew, Danette Jordan, Howard Kelly, and Alicia Nicole Roberts. You have all been such wonderful, incredible resources to us, and we look forward to together continuing this journey and this conversation and building a a community, a business community, and a community where diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is something that everybody feels comfortable about and feels that they can continue this journey in a very positive way. Have a great day, everybody.
You too. Thank you all.
Have a good one,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Best of luck.
Great to see you
Yes.
all.
Be well, everyone.